Have you ever felt like no matter how much effort you put in, you're just not moving? Like something invisible is holding you back, even when everything around you seems fine? What if that sensation isn't failure, but a message from your soul? In this video, we're going to explore something few people dare to confront, the hidden reason why you're not advancing in life. And no, this isn't about motivation hacks or productivity tricks. It's about something much deeper, far more mystical. Carl Jung revealed that the unconscious is constantly communicating with us, not through logic, but through symbols, patterns, and silence. When your life feels stuck, it may be the universe speaking a forgotten truth. You are not ready to move forward until you return to yourself. Many wander through life feeling a strange emptiness, a subtle disconnection from their essence. They chase goals, relationships, and recognition, but the noise inside doesn't quiet. That's because what's missing isn't external, it's spiritual. The journey you crave is not out there. It begins within. What you're about to discover is not a simple explanation. It's a sacred key, one that unlocks the invisible forces shaping your choices, your fears, your stagnation. So stay with me until the end, because this video may shift everything you thought you knew about your blocks, your wounds, and your path. You're not broken. You're being called. And the moment you understand the language of your soul, the fog begins to lift. And before we begin, a gentle reminder, many who watch our videos still aren't subscribed. If you feel this message speaks to a deeper part of you, subscribe now to Celestial Truths and continue walking with us on this journey of inner awakening, spiritual expansion, and mystical discovery. Sometimes when nothing seems to move forward, when every step feels like walking through molasses, it's not failure, it's not laziness, it's a whisper from the unconscious, asking us to stop and listen. According to Jung's deep insights into the psyche, every blockage is a symbol, a coded message. What we often label as self-sabotage might actually be the soul's quiet attempt to redirect us. In the mystical language of the universe, resistance isn't always opposition, it's communication. And in the realm of spirituality, symbols speak louder than logic. The moment you feel paralyzed is often the moment your inner world is trying to awaken you to something forgotten. Picture this: a traveler at a crossroads ready to take the next step, but a dense fog suddenly rolls in. He curses the fog, frustrated, anxious, angry. But what he doesn't realize is that the fog is sacred. It's the voice of the self, veiling the path ahead until the seeker is ready to see clearly. The psyche isn't an enemy, it's a guardian. And that delay, it's not a denial, it's a mystical pause, an invitation to go inward instead of forward. The universe speaks through patterns like these, and only those tuned into the language of the soul will recognize the hidden doorway behind the delay. In analytical psychology, the unconscious often sends messages through dreams, symptoms, or sudden emotional shifts. A recurring dream of being stuck, lost, or trapped can reveal what words cannot. That dream, that anxiety, that subtle withdrawal from life, they are all part of a symbolic ecosystem designed to protect the deeper work. Jung believed that no psychic event is random. If you're not advancing, perhaps it's because your deeper self has chosen stillness as a form of protection or preparation. In spiritual terms, this is not stagnation, it's incubation. So how can you recognize when a blockage is, in truth, a message? Start by observing. Pay attention to what drains your energy. Reflect on what parts of your life feel heavy, repetitious, or lifeless. Look at the synchronicities around you, those meaningful coincidences that echo themes you've been avoiding. Write down your dreams. Ask questions like, what am I refusing to see? What truth is trying to surface through this silence? This inner work is not glamorous, but it is sacred. The mystics of every age knew, before the revelation, there is the stillness. Before the ascent, there is descent. The soul hides its wisdom in places the ego won't look, and so the blockage becomes a threshold, not a wall, but a veil. It asks you not to push through it, but to sit beside it, to ask it questions, to see it not as punishment, but as invitation. And if you dare to sit in that sacred discomfort, something begins to shift. The silence speaks, the darkness reveals, and then almost imperceptibly, the soul begins to move again, because it knows you're finally listening. Yet, this stillness is only the beginning. Behind the fog lies a deeper tension, the friction between the ego and the self, where control meets surrender and the real transformation begins. There is a sacred friction that exists within every seeker, a quiet war between two powerful forces, the ego and the self. The ego, small but loud, wants control, certainty, and quick results. It's the voice that says, let's move forward, let's fix this now. But the self, our deeper totality, the ancient soul connected to the mystical order of the universe, moves in silence, in rhythm, in cycles. It doesn't rush, it waits for alignment. And when the ego charges ahead without this spiritual integration, the path begins to crumble beneath our feet. Life resists, not out of cruelty, but as a cosmic recalibration. Imagine trying to force open a flower before its time. That's what the ego often does. It grips, it pushes, it manipulates the timeline, hoping that action alone will create transformation. But the self cannot be coerced. It reveals itself only when the inner soil is fertile. In Jung's psychology, the self is not merely a higher version of the ego, it's the totality of who we are, including our shadow, our divine potential, our buried wounds, and our forgotten longings. True spiritual growth isn't about dominance, it's about surrender. And so when you feel stuck, it may be that your ego is out of sync with the soul's tempo. Many seekers fall into despair during these moments, interpreting the spiritual pause as failure. But from a mystical perspective, it's the soul creating tension to prevent fragmentation. The ego wants clarity, but the self speaks in paradox. It might call you to stay in a job you hate so you can confront your fear of being unseen. It might lead you into a relationship that challenges your boundaries so you can learn to reclaim your voice. The universe orchestrates these experiences not to harm you, but to draw you deeper into wholeness. In the language of the spirit, nothing is wasted. Every trial is a symbol, every delay a ritual in disguise. So how do we harmonize these inner forces? The answer begins with inner listening. Create space for silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of sacred attention. Through meditation, journaling, and dream analysis, you begin to notice the small ruptures between what the ego wants and what the self needs. You realize that the anxiety isn't random, it's a compass. That the procrastination isn't laziness, it's a gatekeeper. The key is not to kill the ego, but to educate it, to teach it reverence, to help it understand that real progress flows not from speed, but from spiritual alignment with the rhythms of the cosmos. And when that harmony begins to form, when the ego bows in humility and the self rises in sovereignty, movement returns, not because you forced it, but because you became whole, because the parts of you that were once at war have started to speak the same language. But just as this alignment begins to emerge, another truth reveals itself, that what we often call sabotage might not be sabotage at all. It may be something far wiser, far older, and far more protective than we ever imagined. What if what you've been calling sabotage is in truth a sacred form of protection? Yes, what looks like fear, what feels like resistance, might actually be your soul shielding you from reliving an old wound. The unconscious doesn't forget. It remembers every humiliation, every abandonment, every moment your light was dimmed to fit into a world that couldn't hold your truth. And so, when you move towards something new, something expansive, the unconscious may step in, quietly, to guard the fragile parts of you. It's not trying to stop your growth. It's trying to make sure you survive it. You might notice it as a sudden tiredness, a loss of motivation, just as things are about to take off. Or perhaps you find yourself procrastinating, spiraling in self-doubt, questioning every decision. This isn't weakness. This is the psyche sounding its alarm. Be careful. You've been here before. Don't get hurt again. The mystical intelligence of the universe operates not only in grand revelations, but in subtle detours. These emotional barriers, so often misjudged, can be symbolic thresholds asking for deeper healing before we step into the next chapter. Jung understood this dynamic deeply. He saw the psyche not as a battlefield, but as an ecosystem, where even the parts that oppose our conscious desires serve a purpose. In this inner universe, the saboteur is not an enemy. It's a guardian of unresolved pain, and unless we meet it with compassion and curiosity, it will continue to place quiet roadblocks along our path. These protections often wear the masks of fatigue, confusion, even sudden apathy, but beneath them lies a story that wants to be witnessed before it can be rewritten. So how do we approach this inner saboteur with reverence instead of resistance? Begin by tracing your discomfort. When you start something meaningful and suddenly feel blocked, ask yourself, what memory is this waking up in me? What fear is being triggered beneath the surface? In the mystical tradition, symbols often appear before the transformation is ready to begin. Emotional patterns, looping thoughts, or unexpected tension can all be clues. Journaling is powerful here, not to fix, but to illuminate. Meditation, too, helps soften the inner defenses so you can listen without judgment. This listening is not passive, it's alchemical, and as this compassionate dialogue deepens, something astonishing begins to occur. What once felt like sabotage begins to feel like sacred timing. What once appeared as inner resistance now reveals itself as the soul's gentle steering. You begin to trust your pauses, honor your hesitations, and listen to your inner rhythms with humility. And in this softened space, a deeper truth emerges, that even our most confusing behaviors carry intelligence, that the psyche is not chaotic but deeply ordered in its mystical way. Yet just as this layer settles into clarity, another shadow rises, the fear of growth itself, and the silent terror of what we must leave behind to become who we truly are. Every true transformation begins with a death, not a literal one, but a symbolic unraveling, a shedding of skin, of identity, of everything we once believed ourselves to be. And this is precisely why growth is so often feared, not because we don't want it, but because it demands that something within us must be left behind. The comfort of old patterns, the familiarity of suffering, the illusion of control, they all become casualties in the journey toward a more expansive self. The unconscious in its ancient wisdom knows this, and so it resists, not out of malice, but out of instinctive protection from the pain of symbolic loss. Jung taught that the psyche is layered with ancestral memory. It carries within it not only our personal experiences, but the emotional DNA of those who came before us. That means many of the fears we face when stepping into the unknown aren't even ours alone. They are inherited echoes. Somewhere deep inside, our unconscious mind may associate growth with abandonment, success with isolation, or visibility with danger. And so, even when we consciously crave expansion, the soul may resist, not because it's broken, but because it remembers, because it believes that to change is to risk annihilation. You may notice this fear in the quiet moments before a leap, that feeling of paralysis when opportunity knocks, or that sudden pull toward distraction when it's finally time to act. These are not coincidences. They're the psyche's alarm bells, warning of the symbolic death that comes with transformation. But here's the paradox. It is only by allowing something within us to die that something new can be born. The universe, ever mystical, teaches through cycles, death and rebirth, night and day, silence and song. Spirituality invites us to walk through these thresholds, not with resistance but with reverence. So what can be done when the fear of growth rises like a wave? First, name it. Bring it into the light. Speak with it, as you would with a frightened child. Ask, what are you afraid of losing? What identity are you trying to preserve? Then reflect on the narratives you've inherited. Do they belong to you, or were they passed down through silence and survival? Practices like symbolic journaling, dream work, or meditative dialogue with your shadow can begin to dissolve these invisible chains. In the stillness of the inner universe, you'll begin to hear the deeper truth. The self does not fear growth. It fears forgetting who it truly is beneath the layers. And just as you begin to make peace with this inner funeral, something miraculous happens. The fear softens. The symbolic death becomes sacred instead of terrifying. You realize that growth doesn't ask you to destroy yourself. It asks you to release what is no longer alive. And in that release, in that courageous surrender, you begin to glimpse the vastness of who you're becoming. But beware, just as the soul begins to open, the ego often steps in with clever distractions, rational excuses, logical delays. That's when the next mask of resistance appears, the symbolic self-deception that keeps you waiting for the perfect time. There is a subtle kind of sabotage that wears a polished mask. It doesn't scream or panic. It whispers with logic. It tells you things like, "This isn't the right time," or "Maybe after I finish this other thing," or even, "It's not that important really." On the surface, these thoughts appear reasonable, but beneath them lies a deeper force, fear cloaked in rationalization. Jung called this symbolic self-deception, the ego's brilliant ability to use the language of intellect to hide from the call of transformation. And it's perhaps the most dangerous form of resistance, because it feels so justified. The spiritual path is rarely obstructed by chaos alone. More often it is blocked by comfort, the kind of comfort that keeps you numbing, postponing, circling around your true purpose while convincing yourself you're being strategic. This is where the unconscious becomes a trickster, an archetypal energy that dresses fear in the robes of reason. You may find yourself over-preparing, endlessly planning, or constantly waiting for signs, when in truth the signs have already come, but the ego isn't ready to surrender. And so the mystical alignment between the self and the universe is delayed, not because the path isn't ready, but because the walker keeps stopping to ask for permission. This self-deception thrives in distraction. You may notice it when you suddenly dive into trivial tasks right before starting something meaningful, or when you convince yourself that you're not ready enough to begin. These patterns are symbolic defenses, psychic veils that the unconscious raises to protect deeper fears. In a mystical sense, they are spells of stasis, cast by a part of us that still associates change with danger. But in the universe's sacred rhythm, growth doesn't wait for perfection, it waits for willingness. The soul doesn't need you to be flawless, it needs you to be honest. So how do we pierce through this veil? Begin by questioning your excuses with gentle curiosity. Ask, is this delay really about timing or about fear? Am I preparing or am I avoiding? Symbolic journaling can be a mirror here. Write down every reason you give yourself for not moving forward and read them aloud as if they were someone else's. Suddenly, the illusion becomes clearer. The spiritual practice of observing yourself without judgment, witnessing the ego's dance without intervening, can reveal the subtle patterns keeping your truth asleep. Through this, the ego softens, and the self begins to speak again. And once that voice emerges, quiet, clear, unmistakable, you realize that you were never truly waiting for the right time. You were waiting for the courage to stop pretending. And in this moment of clarity, a door begins to open, not outside of you, but within. A doorway that leads directly to the past, to the invisible wounds and ancestral echoes that shape the very structure of your inner world. Because sometimes the reason you're not advancing has nothing to do with the present, and everything to do with what was never healed back then. The present moment is never truly alone. It carries shadows, echoes, fragments of yesterday that quietly inhabit today's decisions, fears, and hesitations. Jung taught that our unconscious mind holds every emotional imprint from our early life, and that what we haven't healed we repeat, not by choice but by design. The soul, in its mystical intelligence, brings the same patterns in new forms again and again until we are finally ready to look. So if you find yourself stuck, unable to move forward, ask not just what's wrong with now, but what pain from back then is still speaking through me. Many of our present-day blockages are actually old wounds wrapped in new clothing. A fear of public speaking may not be about speaking at all, but about the moment your voice was silenced as a child. A fear of intimacy might not be about love, but about the grief of once being left behind. The unconscious doesn't operate in linear time. It weaves the past into the present, in symbols and sensations. That's why certain experiences seem disproportionately intense, because they're activating something ancient. In the spiritual universe within, time folds in on itself, and what was left unresolved returns like a sacred echo asking to be heard. This invisible inheritance can be hard to detect because it often shows up as overreactions, emotional numbing, or patterns we just can't seem to break. But those are not flaws. They are psychic signals. a flare from the deeper self. And the moment we begin to trace those emotional threads back to their origin, something profound happens. The unconscious begins to speak more clearly. Through dreams, synchronicities, or sudden flashes of memory, the universe starts unveiling the true roots of your struggle. You are not cursed, you are carrying emotional legacies that long to be transmuted into wisdom. Healing begins with remembrance, not through force, but through invitation. Take time to sit with your story. Write it out, not just what happened, but how it felt, what it cost you, what it changed in you. Notice what parts still ache. The practice of writing with sacred intention, symbolic journaling, can reconnect you to the child or adolescent still waiting to be seen. Meditation on memory, when done with compassion, allows these inner figures to emerge from exile. And once they're seen, the energy they were holding begins to move again. Life starts to breathe through you differently. And just as this inner reconfiguration begins, a sacred realization emerges that the blockage you've been battling isn't an enemy, it's a guardian of your forgotten self, and that by tending to the past, you are not regressing, but reclaiming. In truth, healing the root is not ease, backward movement. It is the only way forward. And through this inner reconciliation, a mysterious doorway appears. What once felt like an obstacle now reveals itself as a hidden passage, leading to something far greater, a portal disguised as paralysis, a test of soul readiness. And this leads us straight into one of Jung's most sacred insights, the blocked path as the very gate to transformation. What if the thing you're calling a blockage is actually a portal, not a wall, but a veil? In Jung's mystical psychology, the symbols that obstruct us are often the same ones that hold the key to our expansion. This paradox is one of the soul's most profound teachings. The obstacle is the initiation. The moment life seems to shut down, when every effort feels fruitless, is often the exact moment you're standing at the threshold of transformation. But this doorway is not marked with signs. It is hidden in silence, discomfort, and the deep ache of not knowing what comes next. The soul does not knock loudly. It hums through synchronicities, dreams, and that strange sensation of something more stirring beneath the surface. When you feel blocked, it may be because you're standing at the entrance to a new archetypal stage, a passage that requires not action but surrender. The self, vast and unshakable, guides us not by pushing us forward, but by calling us inward. And so, what appears to be stagnation may be the universe's sacred way of slowing you down so you can enter this portal. With consciousness rather than force, the path of individuation, the journey toward becoming whole, is rarely linear. It moves in spirals, in shadows, in sacred returns. Jung saw individuation not as a goal, but as a process of integration, bringing together the fragmented parts of ourselves, the rejected shadow, the wounded child, the forgotten dreams, and weaving them into a living wholeness. And so, the blockage is not a detour. It is the map itself. It asks, can you see the lesson in what you're resisting? Can you honor the soul's pace instead of the ego's demands? Only then does the symbolic doorway reveal itself. You may notice the signs when you begin to dream of keys, doors, thresholds, or when the same life themes keep cycling back, asking for your attention. These are invitations from the inner universe. Practicing deep introspection through dream interpretation, sacred journaling, or contemplative silence can illuminate the meaning hidden in the blockage. Instead of asking, how do I get through this? Ask, what part of me is this trying to awaken? This shift in perception is not just psychological, it's spiritual. It's how the self initiates transformation, not by removing the obstacle, but by revealing its sacred purpose. And once this purpose begins to take form, a strange peace arrives, not because the path becomes easier, but because you realize you were never truly lost, only unready to see the truth behind the mask. The blockage was never there to stop you. It was there to prepare you. And now, having stood at the threshold long enough, something begins to stir. A quiet readiness, a new rhythm rising from within. But the soul does not move through force. It moves through reconnection. And that's when the final truth begins to unfold, that the way forward is not always ahead. Sometimes it's the journey inward, the return to the self you once abandoned. In a world that glorifies progress, speed, and forward motion, few realize that sometimes the most profound transformation happens when we stop pushing, when we stop pretending, when we turn around, not to regress, but to retrieve what was lost. Jung knew this truth intimately. Real growth isn't always about going somewhere new. Often, it's about returning to the abandoned parts of the self that were exiled in the name of survival. The soul doesn't want you to rush ahead. It wants you to come home. Stagnation, in this sense, becomes sacred. A spiritual holding pattern, a mystical. Pause where the universe seems to whisper, "You've forgotten something, go back and get it." And what was forgotten? Usually it's the parts of you deemed unworthy, the grief you never processed, the dreams you silenced, the inner child still hiding in the corners of your psyche. The way forward becomes the way back, not toward the past, but toward wholeness. This is the path of reintegration, the act of recovering your own soul. The process is subtle, but deeply powerful. It often begins with a quiet longing, a sense that something essential is missing, even if your life appears fine on the outside. That longing is not weakness, it's the call of the self. And when you begin to listen, through contemplative writing, silent walks under the sky, or by observing the symbols that show up in your daily life, you start to feel it, a new energy slowly building, not from effort, but from alignment. The blockage begins to dissolve, not because you pushed through it, but because you finally sat with it. This reconnection brings clarity. The confusion lifts, not all at once, but in layers. You begin to move differently, not out of desperation, but out of resonance with your own truth. The universe starts to respond in kind. Synchronicities align, the right people appear, and the inner noise starts to quiet. That's because the spiritual universe reflects back your internal coherence. When you are fragmented, life feels scattered. But when you return to yourself, life reorganizes. Around that sacred center, the center you are now ready to inhabit. And so what once looked like a dead end becomes a sanctuary. What once felt like failure becomes revelation. And in that stillness, something holy happens. You remember who you are, not just intellectually but spiritually, not as a role or a title or a goal, but as a soul reconnected to the mystical rhythm of the universe. And from this inner reunion, you move forward, but not the way you once did. Now, every step carries meaning. Now the journey is not about escaping yourself, but embodying your truth, and from here, everything begins. Now that you've walked through these hidden layers of your soul, I want to ask you something deeply personal. What part of your life feels blocked right now? And what might your soul be trying to reveal through it? Share your experience in the comments. Your journey may be the key that unlocks someone else's. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Celestial Truths, and turn on notifications, so you never miss a moment of the spiritual insight and psychological depth we share here. And if you're ready to go even deeper, watch the next video appearing on your screen now. It reveals the sacred signs your unconscious uses to guide your destiny. Trust me, it might explain things you've felt your whole life. With reverence and truth, this is Celestial Truths.